What my Doberman found left me speechless. I'm not sure how I ended up with a Doberman in the first place. My friends who knew me before Dallas, yes. Dallas, named by my sister in honor of her favorite football team, laughed when they found out I'd gotten a dog. Especially a Doberman. I was never the type for pets. I'd once convinced myself that I preferred animals in theory. They were cute in videos, funny in photos, even intriguing from a distance. But the reality of a pet, a living, breathing creature dependent on me, was overwhelming. But then, life has a way of surprising you when you least expect it. Dallas came to me by accident. You could say, my sister Sarah, whose life was chaos incarnate, got him as a pup on a whim from a rescue group in Texas. She'd always wanted a Doberman but underestimated the responsibility. Within 6 months, she called me, sounding desperate, overwhelmed by a full-time job, 2 kids, and this new addition. She asked, no, she practically begged, if I could take him in, just until she got things under control. That was 2 years ago. He's a big dog, with muscular legs and an air of authority that made people cross the street when we went for walks. But for all his intimidating looks, Dallas was gentle. He'd curl up beside me on the couch, nudge my hand for scratches, and even had a strange habit of laying his head on my lap when he wanted attention. I'd never imagined becoming attached to a dog, but somehow, Dallas became part of my life in a way that nothing else had. It happened on a Tuesday night, a night that started like any other. I was sitting on the couch, reading, when Dallas started coughing. It was subtle at first, just a soft, almost inaudible hack. I barely noticed it at first, too engrossed in my book. But the cough persisted, growing louder, more forceful, until I put the book down and looked at him. He was lying on the rug, his body tense, his head low, and he looked at me with eyes that were wide, almost frightened. I remember reaching out, calling his name softly, and feeling a pang of worry that settled deep in my stomach. Dogs coughed, I told myself. It wasn't necessarily something to be concerned about. But when he started pawing at his mouth, as if trying to dislodge something, my worry turned to panic. I knelt beside him, trying to look into his mouth, my heart racing as he gagged, his body convulsing with each attempt to expel whatever was caught in his throat. I could see nothing at first, just his pink gums and a flicker of his tongue. And then, something metallic. I reached in, fingers trembling, and felt something cold, sharp. In the dim light, I could make out what it was, a piece of metal, almost like a shard from a piece of jewelry or a small object. My mind reeled. How had he gotten something like that in his mouth? He wasn't the type to chew on things. Never touched my belongings, and the house was usually spotless. I managed to pull it free, and Dallas collapsed beside me, panting heavily, his body relaxing as he lay his head on my knee. My relief was so overwhelming that I nearly laughed. But as I looked at the object in my hand, my stomach twisted again. It was a ring, a small, delicate gold ring, with a single diamond embedded in the center. A woman's ring. I felt a chill creep over me, an unease that prickled at the back of my neck. I didn't own any rings. Had never even seen this one before. I lived alone, didn't have visitors, and as far as I knew, Dallas had never had access to anything that could have brought this into my house. My first thought was that Sarah had left it behind, but she hadn't visited in months. And even then, she wasn't one for delicate jewelry. This ring looked old, almost antique, with a slightly worn band and a subtle patina that hinted at years of wear. That night, I lay in bed, the ring on my bedside table, its presence a strange, heavy weight on my mind. Every few minutes, I'd glance at it, my mind churning through explanations, none of which made sense. The more I thought about it, the stranger it seemed. There was something about the ring, something that didn't belong. It felt out of place, almost like it was waiting for something, or someone. Over the next few days, I tried to forget about it, but Dallas wouldn't let me. Every time I left the room, he'd start whining, pawing at the door, his eyes fixated on the spot where I'd placed the ring. It was unnerving. He'd never been like this before. So restless, so anxious. And then, a few nights later, it happened again. I woke to the sound of Dallas choking, a low, guttural noise that sent me scrambling out of bed. I found him on the floor, gagging, his body convulsing, and my heart sank. This time, it was a piece of fabric, torn and frayed, like a scrap from an old dress. I stared at it, my mind racing, trying to make sense of it. Where was he finding these things? I hadn't brought anything new into the house, hadn't left anything lying around, and yet here it was. Another strange object, something old and worn, something that didn't belong. I started searching the house, combing through every room, looking for any sign of where these things were coming from. I turned over furniture, emptied drawers, checked every nook and cranny, but found nothing. The house was exactly as it had always been, neat, orderly, and devoid of anything that could explain the strange objects Dallas kept finding. The next day, I called Sarah. I told her everything, hoping she might have some explanation. Something I'd missed. She listened in silence, and when I finished, there was a long pause. Then she said something that sent a chill down my spine. "That sounds like, well, it sounds like something our grandmother used to tell us about," she said, her voice hesitant. "Remember those stories? About the haunted house in town? The one no one would go near?" She used to say that sometimes objects could hold onto things, memories, even spirits. I laughed, a shaky, nervous laugh, but the unease in my stomach didn't fade. I'd never believed in ghosts. Had always dismissed those stories as just that, stories. But there was something about this. Something that didn't feel like a coincidence. That night, I locked the ring and the fabric scrap in a drawer, determined to put it all out of my mind. But as I lay in bed, listening to the quiet hum of the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. Something unseen and silent, lurking just beyond the edges of my vision. In the weeks that followed, the strange occurrences continued. Dallas found more objects, each one stranger than the last. A small, rusted key, a torn photograph, a lock of hair tied with a faded ribbon. Each time, I felt a growing sense of dread, a feeling that I was dealing with something far beyond my understanding. One evening, as I held the key in my hand, a thought occurred to me, a thought so wild, so impossible, that I almost dismissed it. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. What if these objects were clues, pieces of a story that someone or something was trying to tell me? With a mix of fear and curiosity, I began piecing the objects together, trying to make sense of the fragments of a life that seemed to linger in my home. Each object felt like a piece of a puzzle that, once solved, might explain the strange presence I felt, the sense of something watching, waiting. As the days turned into weeks, I found myself drawn deeper and deeper into the mystery, my life consumed by the strange tale unfolding in my hands. And Dallas, my once calm, gentle companion, grew more restless, more anxious, as if he could sense the unseen force that had taken hold of our lives. In the end, the story wasn't one I'd ever expected. A tale of love, loss, and betrayal. A life long forgotten but still lingering, haunting the very walls of my home. I don't know if I ever found all the answers, or if I'll ever truly understand the force that brought those objects to me. But one thing is certain. Dallas and I are forever bound to the tale of the choking Doberman. A story that will haunt us both for as long as we live.